All right, let's take some weights. I'm gonna kind of speed run through this and just mark everything down, fill them in on a spreadsheet that I have started for reference later. There's gonna be a few things that I can already imagine will be worth talking about in detail. It's gonna be the fork, certainly the wheels. We're gonna look at those somewhat in depth. And I'm going to exclude a couple of things, really small odds and ends like the little headset spacers and pieces like that, and the entire handlebar. This thing I'm leaving in one piece. I'm not that critically worried about this. I think we're gonna find most of the weight of this bike elsewhere. So let's get started and see where we get. Okay, so that's us taking weights of the Explorer, things that we thought were the most important to look at. We hopefully were clever enough to overlay the weights as we were going into this video here so that they were just displayed to you. Otherwise, I've got them all recorded in a really crude spreadsheet and a little table that we should make available to people if we figure out relevant places to post them, or maybe here, find it in the description below or in the comments or somewhere else where you can just have a link to that document and really see what we found on our breakdown. Most of the bike is pretty straightforward, so let's look at what some of that is. I want to note that weight alone is not the be-all end-all of every bike build. It's most important for people who are really chasing grams because they're trying to get the best advantage in races. Those are the kind of people for whom it really makes the most sense to spend that money to shave off the most weight possible. By example, I have in the stand one of my way too many bikes. This is a bike I'm building up to be my new touring bike. This thing is brutally heavy and I don't care, because what I'm looking for in my touring bike is for it to be smooth and comfortable and durable. That's what I really want, and to have carrying capacity as well. That's why I have that frame mixed with this Surly troll fork. Both of these can carry a ton of weight. And by the time I get racks and bags and get this thing loaded down, this whole bike with everything that it's going to be carrying probably ends up being 70 or 80 pounds, somewhere between 60 and 80. So at that point, 7 pounds of frame weight just doesn't matter. There is definitely a hierarchy of need that we all get to choose for ourselves based on what we really want our bike to do or how we think it feels. If you're just out riding unloaded and you want to go as fast as possible, yeah, you're probably going to chase weight savings, especially in things like wheels, because then you get into the concept of rotating mass, which makes a huge difference if you can save anything there. But just wanted to note that it may not be the most important thing to you to save a couple of pounds, and it doesn't have to be. There are situations where it's not going to matter and you get to choose for yourself. First thing I'll say is that with the frame in the scale here, this is not that bad. This is a lot better than what I expected to find when we were taking this thing apart. I thought all the components were going to be real compromises, but the frame itself is actually a pretty good starting point for most any builds. We can see this thing weighs in at 2.1 kilograms and or 4 pounds, 11 ounces in American Freedom units. What does, 2,100 grams mean in a bike frame? For an aluminum frame, bear in mind that like a higher end aluminum frame where they're really caring about quality and weight savings, it might shake out at like 1,800 grams. It's not huge. There's a difference, but this frame is a surprisingly good frame for such an inexpensive bike. It's got attachment points all over the place. The welds look pretty reasonable, except in a few small cases. This is a pretty good frame to build from. If you start with this thing and you absolutely love it and you're like, oh, I wish it did this and that, don't feel bad about throwing a few dollars at it, because I think that this frame is still worth it, even if you get up into a bike that's approaching $700, $800, maybe $1,000 total bike, value at the end. Still worth it. It's not heavy. It's not particularly heavy as far as aluminum frame goes, and it seems well made. I got no problem with that. This fork, though, is not light. This fork is about as heavy as it gets for a steel fork. We're talking about a 1,400 gram fork. It's about 3 pounds worth of fork. By example, the Surly Troll fork that you just saw me have on my touring bike weighs slightly less. And this thing is pretty serious. And it has an uncut steerer, so there's still some weight to come off of this big, brutal beast, and it's got bosses all over the place. It looks like you could go into medieval battle with it. If you took this thing to the moon and threw it back to Earth, by the time it hit the ground, you could just pick it up and put a wheel back in it, and it would probably be rideable. This thing is intense, and it is still slightly less heavy than the Explorer fork. Furthermore, this is another steel fork, steel steerer for a 700C wheel with the same caliper tab. This fork, 1 kilo. So we're talking about quite a bit of weight savings, steel for steel, just in this thing, going to a little bit of a slimmer profile and less attachment points for things, but they don't need to weigh 1,000 pounds. Steel can still be reasonable. If we go to an extreme example, we can see one of these slick carbon things. This is a whiskey fork. It's a carbon fork with a carbon steerer. To be fair, this thing doesn't have any mounting points on it for things. This doesn't have a ton of carrying capacity the way that the other forks are designed for, to be backpacky or bike packy. Also, the caliper mounts are flush mount instead of the tab mountain style. But this weighs half a kilogram. This thing weighs 500 grams. That's a 1 pound fork. That is a huge weight savings in the front end of the bike. It is worth mentioning that not all carbon forks are created equal, especially if you go back in time and try to buy one from however many 15, 20 years ago off of eBay. If the message that you get from this is weight savings is the first thing that I have to do and I have to get the most possible, therefore I'm gonna do the carbon fork, Josh, I don't care what you say, and you go to AliExpress, you go to eBay, and you just get the biggest discount on a carbon fork that you possibly can, these things can fail if not made well. They will crack, they'll just explode, basically. That can happen. That doesn't happens certainly a lot less with modern stuff that's got layups that are done well and resins that are cured properly. But be cautious. It's not worth it to get a deal on something that's gonna fail on you. Just use good judgment when you're shopping around. When we're looking for weight savings on bikes for people that come in here, usually they're pretty sorted out. And we're looking for very marginal gains. We can spend real big boy money to find 100 grams here or there. When we talk about something like this, what we're talking about is a kind of cost benefit analysis. The cost of this is going to be very low. The benefit is going to be, pretty high if they can hit their $250 total bike price point. But the benefit to your ride quality is going to be very high if we can take a chunk of weight out of the front of the bike. It's gonna make an immediate difference. This is the kind of fork that in the automotive world would belong on the front of a Pontiac Bonneville or a Ford Fairlane. This thing is no joke. I think you probably need forklift certification to operate this fork. As a matter of fact, let's take a look. Yeah, funny enough, I took a look at the user manual that came with this, and if we just open this up and look toward the back of this thing, we'll find there is a forklift certification included. You just need to sign this to be legal. Make sure you carry that on the bike with you, and you'll be above board. You'll have no problems with anybody. Another easy choice on the search here is this seat post. This seat post is steel, This clamping setup is steel. This is where the seat attaches to, and that is a very old BMX style and very heavy. This thing alone has got some heft to it. And then it couples with a real full-length seat post. And this thing is over a pound. This is about a pound, 1 ounce. Compare that to a not particularly special, but reasonably nice Originate aluminum post that has an integrated clamp like this. The seat attaches to here. Obviously, this thing weighs 3/4 of a pound. So we're saving a bit more than 1/4 of a pound just in this. And this seat itself is not actually particularly heavy. I got no complaints about this thing unless you find it uncomfortable, which is personal preference. But this made it to this is actually going to make an impact on this bike that's worth doing. I will touch on this Crankset only briefly because I don't have a lot of huge problems with it. This is not terrible. This is an aluminum arm crank, which is not heavy, but most of the weight from this thing is going to come from the stamped steel chain rings and this chonky square taper bottom bracket. I really don't have a problem with a square taper, but this one's just got some serious weight in it. But really it's gonna be a lot in the chain ring. The reason I'm not gonna complain about this too hard is we are gonna ride this. And changing this out kind of makes it more reasonable for us to do wholesale drivetrain changes, and really we're trying to be a lot more selective about what we change. One thing I do like about this is the selection of chain rings, basically the selection of teeth on these chain rings. This is a 40, what did I count this at? It's a 4630, which I think is a good coupling for a kind of like a mid-compact double. And the fact that they made this a double was a good choice. Another good choice that I think they made, I hope I'm gonna be able to show this off. You see where this says 170 right there? So somebody who was thinking about it chose the crank arm length on this. 170 would be the measurement from here to the middle of here. And a lot of times when they're just assembling budget bikes, for some reason, everybody just defaults to 175 size chainring, so a little bit longer than this. However, in the modern age, we're all rethinking crank arm length and we're going shorter and shorter. Putting this length of a crank arm on this size bike, because we got our frame in medium flavor, makes sense. I don't know if the large one would come with 175s or if the small one would come with this or even a smaller crank arm length, but for this frame size on this bike, I think that's a good choice. And we'll probably roll with this for a while we make smaller incremental upgrades. I'm more likely to think that we're gonna concentrate on the gearing out back on the rear wheel and just try to find some more range there and leave this alone for a minute. Wheels I'm going to address in another video entirely. We're going to look at these a lot more in depth, take apart the hubs, figure out why these are set up so tight, see what kind of grease is in there, if any, and repack them. Put them in the truing stand, see how true they are and see what the spoke tensions are. These are going to be machine built wheels, so I give a lot of forgiveness and grace for a wheel built wheel, but there's still improvement to be made even if you don't change the wheel. And we're not likely to just throw a wheel set or build a wheel set for this right off the bat. What we are likely to do, however, is deal with this rear hub in particular. This obviously has threads on it. That means that that gear cluster is a freewheel. It's got the clicking in this thing. That screws onto there. We are thinking that we possibly change this hub. Maybe. If we don't change the whole wheel, maybe we just try to swap this hub out, get a more modern hub that will take a set of gears that will slide on. That's basically a free hub body that would go on here, and that would give us a lot more range. We could keep it 7-speed like this is. We could go 8-speed, 9, 10, 11, 12. Campagnola's making 13s. We're probably not throwing an Eckhart group set at this, but you get the idea. We're trying to buy flexibility by addressing this rear wheel in particular. Front one, we probably just roll on it. All right, there's our findings on weight. Some things are heavier than others, and it makes a lot of sense. I don't really actually have any complaints or criticisms for the way that this bike is assembled, because this bike was targeting a price point. And I think that whoever worked in cooperation with the part manufacturers and the accountants probably got together and butted heads and figured out what was going to work to hit the $250 retail price. And that again, I've said it before, I'll say it again, that's pretty impressive that they could put this together for that kind of price. Certainly there are improvements to be made, and I think that they can be made pretty cost effectively. So we're gonna do that and see where we get to. We'll put this thing back together at this point and take some real rides on it as is before we change anything, just to kind of get a feel for how it rides out of the box. And if you're anywhere near Northeast Ohio, maybe we'll see you out there.